Hi, this is Jeff Curto, and welcome to episode number 23 of Camera Position, a podcast about the creative side of photography. Well, for those of you who have been following along with previous podcasts, you know a couple of things about me as a photographer. One is that my particular passion in photography on a personal level is for black and white imagery, and also specifically black and white imagery of Italy, which is a subject I've been pursuing for quite a long time, about 16 years now. And you also may be aware that I just returned a couple of weeks ago from a 3 week trip to Italy to make photographs and spent quite a bit of time in Sicily and a little bit of time in the province of Basilicata, that would be the Arch of the Boot, and some time in Tuscany. And today, what I'd like to do in camera position 23 is talk a little bit about a couple of photographs that I made in Sicily. A couple of photographs that I think are interesting for what they are, but also for what they aren't in some ways. So it's a Sunday morning, and I've just had a second espresso, and I'm ready to talk about some of these photographs. And I'd like to first sort of set the scene a bit in terms of where I was and what it was that I was looking at. Most of you who've been following along with these podcasts and looking at my work know that my primary photographic interest is in architectural subjects. And so when I find an architectural subject that I think is really quite beautiful, especially if it's one from the Baroque or Renaissance period, I get fairly jazzed about making pictures. And so it was really interesting to me to be driving through the Sicilian city of Modica, which is in the sort of southern and eastern portion of the island of Sicily, and come upon this church, San Giorgio, in Modica. And it is a Baroque structure and has this amazing ornamentation on it, as do many actually churches in Sicily. Sicily has quite a lot of Baroque architecture, and so it was late in the afternoon, and the sun was shining on the facade of the church, and I was very excited about making photographs, and I kept walking around the church, trying to find something that I could make a photograph of that would speak to me in some way, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't find anything. It was sort of like standing in a place where you knew that something was going to be photographable, and suddenly really not seeing anything at all that had any kind of photographic possibilities, at least to my eye. And again, my penchant is really not for entire facades of things, but rather for small details. What happened was, as I continued to stare at this facade and sort of become frustrated by the fact that I couldn't see a photograph in this amazing building, until I turned to my left and found this photograph, and or at least the subject of this photograph, which was a palazzo or some other public type structure that was off to one side of the cathedral here in Modica, Sicily. And the thing about this that was really funny is that here I had been drawn to pull the car over and get out of the car and drag my large format camera bag and film holders and tripod out of the car because of the facade of this church, and I couldn't find anything to photograph in this thing. And yet, when I turned to my left, I found this amazingly beautiful interplay of shadows and the way in which the railing casts the shadow on the sort of tiled or stonework floor of the side courtyard here, and the way the light was modulating across the surfaces of this building, that was a photograph. And in fact, I made two or three different images of this particular subject, and this is the one that seemed to me, once I got the film developed and some scans made, and I've got all of this stuff scanned now. That's why you haven't heard from me for a few days. I've been busy developing film and scanning and getting all of these things done. But here we are with a photograph that wasn't my initial subject. And I think there's that lesson there that we get visually interested not by a preconceived notion, at least most of the time, but rather by what we see. So I'd gotten out of the car thinking that what I was going to get was this picture of this remarkable Baroque church that I'd seen as I'm driving by, and kind of knew that it was there and so forth. And what I got was a different photograph, and a photograph that, in fact, is somewhat different from the other work that I have done of buildings and facades and so forth, and one that's really more about the light and the way the light modulates through these things, through and over these objects, rather than the objects themselves. In fact, the facade itself here in this photograph is not all that enthralling, but it's what the light's doing that's interesting. So, at least interesting to me. So the idea of making a picture really without any preconceived notion is I guess what this is about. But I think it's also about the idea that we come at photographic subjects with this preconceived notion, but more than that, the preconceived notion seems to block us from other visual stimuli. And what was really interesting to me is that after I spent some time making photographs of this light falling across this facade of the building that was to the left of the cathedral, I then looked back at the cathedral and walked around a little bit more and then found this photograph, which was really more like what I was thinking that I might find in the first place. And it took me a while to find it. It's kind of an unusual, awkward position in terms of the way the camera needed to be positioned and how high up it was and so forth and so on. But I think that what happened here was that because I had seen the first photograph and had spent some time making some photographs around that idea that I had discovered, that what happened was here I was now a little bit more visually aware of what else might be going on in the subject. And looking back at the facade of the cathedral itself, I began to see things differently and began to look at different possibilities. So, in a way, it's sort of like a musician practicing. And the idea that practice, as you practice scales or practice a particular piece that you might be working on, that as you practice those things, what you discover is little openings that then allow you into some other visual possibilities. I'm reasonably certain that I couldn't have made this photograph of this marvelous Baroque decoration over this doorway when I first walked up to the church. It would have not been something that I would have seen right off the bat, but it was only after making these other photographs and spending some time kind of loosening myself up that I found a photographic subject that not only was more along the idea of the preconceived notion that I had going into the subject, but in fact was fresher, I think, than anything I would have come up with without having had that previous experience of making the first photograph that you're looking at or that you looked at in the podcast, or again looking at it on cameraposition.com. So here are two photographs from the month of June in 2006, two new photographs from me, and photographs that I think are successful for my work and successful in terms of what I learned about photography while making them. This second photograph of the little cherub and the decoration over the doorway is one that I really like, partly because of that light-dark relationship of the head, the little cherub's head, against the white background. And normally, in a lot of the photographs that I've made, the object that I find most interesting turns out to be this glowing white object against a darker ground. But I like the idea of inverting that notion of light against dark. And as I worked on this image in Photoshop after scanning the 4x5 negative, I worked on the idea of making some areas of darkness around the edges of the image that could contrast against this lighter spot, and really trying to get the light area right behind the little cherub's head to be one of the lightest areas in the photograph, and kind of Now, one last thing that I wanted to cover in camera position 23 here, and although I know I've vowed not to spend a lot of time or really any time talking about technical stuff in camera position, but I did want to mention this just because I know there are a number of photographers out there listening to these who need to solve technical problems, and I still am fairly devoted to shooting film, primarily because I'm shooting with large and medium format cameras, and most of the work that I have scanned over the last bunch of years has been scanned on an Imicon 848 scanner. Now, I don't own one of those. I have a day job as a photography teacher at a college, College of DuPage near Chicago. And in our facility, we have an Imicon 848 scanner, and I use that scanner to scan my negatives. But I recently acquired an Epson 750 V750 Pro scanner, and I just wanted to mention how impressed I am with the quality of the scans that I'm getting from this thing from my large format negatives. Now, I haven't scanned any of my medium format negatives on it yet, but the 4x5 negatives, I've scanned quite a large number of them. In fact, I've made low-res scans of everything that I shot on this 3-week trip of the 4x5 stuff, and probably 24 now scans at much higher resolution. And I'm here to tell you that this $800 or so scanner is pretty darn close in terms of quality to the $15,000 Imicon scanner in terms of really the primary thing is the ability to reach down into details of shadows and highlights and find detail that's there, and so that Dmax of the scanner or gamma of the scanner is working pretty well. So I just wanted to mention that because I think it's a pretty interesting thing that the technology of the digital side of the medium is changing in such a way that we're able to use these really high quality devices that are becoming less and less expensive all the time. So just a sort of a little technical nugget there that I thought might be useful. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this episode of Camera Position. I did want to take a moment to thank those of you who have stopped by the iTunes Music Store and made a comment. It was nice that all of those of you who did make comments made positive comments, which I greatly appreciate. And that does sort of raise the profile of Camera Position a little bit in terms of where people are finding it and how many people are listening to it. And I'm hoping that you folks are getting something out of what it is that I'm talking about. Hopefully back now on a once a week or so schedule. And I also appreciated those of you who commented on my recent Getting Back Your Box of Crayons, much longer form podcast, that podcast of a presentation I had made, and sort of an interesting idea to try that from time to time. I had a couple of you respond that you liked it so much that you'd like to have me do more of those kinds of things. So I really appreciate those of you who are leaving comments on the cameraposition.com website. I really appreciate those of you who are sending me an email now and again to remind me that you're out there. Here I am sitting in my little home office here, more of a closet really, and really appreciate knowing that people are out there listening to Camera Position and getting some benefit out of it. So thanks very much. Thanks for listening, and I hope you go out today and make a couple of photographs. So see what you can find, and once you're in the place where you think you've got a photographic subject, turn 90 degrees to your left and see what you can find. So thanks for listening, and thanks again for coming on board with Camera Position, the podcast about the creative side of photography.